Alright guys, I luckily did have long enough piece left of my gasket making material, and I'll still have plenty left because obviously the gasket isn't but that thick. So, it's easy to trace around the outside of this housing, but it is not easy to transfer the pattern. So, what I did was took and just simply sprayed some WD-40, or actually Kroll oil, on the surfaces. Not too much, just enough. And very carefully I took and placed it on that surface, and it left a wet impression of it, but I was very, very careful to not let it slide or not let it shift at any, so I can get an exact mark. So then I went back over this before this dries, if it'll dry, and marked everything out. Now the next step, after I cut out the big center part, which we obviously don't need, I'm going to set this back on here and get it lined up perfectly. Being very careful to keep it in perfect alignment. I'm going to flip it over onto a piece of solid wood, and I'm going to probably, that's another problem, a lot of times you try to drill a hole with a drill bit, it doesn't work good. So I'm going to try to devise some kind of hollow device, kind of like a hole punch. Now I may even use a hole punch if I can find one around here, to punch out these holes so I get a nice neat cut, because that's the hardest part in making a gasket, is where you tear through and you rip out to the outside and then your gasket's screwed. And the only other gasket I got to make, and which I'll make out of the leftovers in here, is a gasket around this where the pull start recoil assembly goes. And then we'll be ready to put that back on, and we'll be leak free. The only other thing we got left to do on this bike is check the brakes, because they're not working. So, and like a bunch of idiots, they used Phillips screws. So hopefully I can get my little impact driver back, and then I'll have be able to get that cover off and inspect the brakes, see how bad those shoes are. Hopefully they're good, but I have a feeling they're not, because that adjuster is way out. So hopefully though I can get a little bit back on it and get it cleaned up. But my clutch assembly and all of my pulleys are nice and clean and oiled up now, so they're hopefully not going to rust again. And once this gasket's on here and it's sealed up good, hopefully we'll have no more rust. So I'm going to begin cutting this out, guys. Alright guys, I've got my gasket cut out now, and after placing this on there, what I did was took one of the bolts that goes in there, put the cover over it, made sure the gasket was perfectly aligned with the cover, and took a hammer over this piece of wood and beat the bolt down to kind of get the hole. Now they're not real perfect holes, but they will work in order to get it in without tearing the gasket too bad. Now, there's a couple of spots here where the bolts were missing. I opted for the time being not to put them in. I may take a sharp pointy object, put it through there once I get the other bolts tightened in, and then try to get it in there. So it should work. Keep your fingers crossed, guys. A little bit hard to see. My shop light isn't that good. It's a little noisy I know right now because the compressor's running, but you can see I got it on there. One problem we run into, you can see it right here, right where my finger is. There's a guide pin right here. There's two of them on here. One down there, right where my finger is. And that just helps kind of guide the thing into position, kind of like you would find on a transmission. So what I did is I placed the gasket up here, put a few bolts in to kind of hold it, and took a ball peen hammer and took the flat end and just struck it a few times to get a good impression of it. And then I took my razor blade and cut it out nice and smooth. So turned out pretty good, by far to get best gasket I've ever made as far as not ripping and being even, because this stuff here is very easily torn. But I believe we got it, guys. I'm fixing to put the cover back on.